Hey friends, welcome back to our unconventional homesteading season here on the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast. So far, we've talked to people in all different stages of life. We've talked about living in different locations, harsh ones, tropical ones. But today, we're taking the angle of how to homestead when maybe your health isn't exactly what you had planned it would be. I know many of you have messaged me over the years telling me that maybe you deal with chronic pain or you deal with some sort of illness, or maybe a family member does, and you're trying to figure out if homesteading is feasible for you in that situation. And I have some very special guests today who I think will provide a lot of encouragement around that topic. So I'd like to welcome Kevin Mack and Julie Stonefelt from Wild Homestead Living to the podcast. Hey guys.
Hey,
Hello, Jill.
thanks so much for having us. I have to tell you that in 2016, when we decided to really go for our homestead dream, I started to feel a little scared. And my first response to that is research. And you were the first person I found online that made
Oh,
us feel like maybe as brand new homesteaders, we weren't as crazy as people thought we were. So it's
yes.
delightful to be able to catch up with you now and connect.
That is awesome. And I'm so honored that I was able to play a little part. And look at you now. You guys are incredible. I was looking at your website before we jumped on. You've taken it so far. And so, what an inspiration. Way to go.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I feel like you guys have a lot you could share, but really what I'd like to hone in on today is how you guys have kind of overcome odds to create your homestead and this life that you had dreamed of starting in 2016. Was that kind of when it all kicked off?
Yeah, so we actually got together 20 years ago, and we've been married for 14 years now.
60.
16. I'm really bad at math.
It's all right. It's
Um, but it was really when Kevin first started having some health issues that we started to get more serious about healthy living. And then it was after my health issues that we decided to go for our homestead dream. But maybe, Kevin, you could talk about yours at first.
Yeah, so in 2010, I was diagnosed with diabetes. At first, they
Mm,
thought it was type 2. It turned out to be type 1, which is an autoimmune related disease. Um, it really shook up our world.
I
it's,
bet.
uh, I didn't have any of the risk factors, didn't have any family history. And when it hit, it was pretty hard, pretty hard news.
Yeah.
But we started taking a much closer look at how we were living, and especially what we were putting in our bodies, because diabetes is uh, a disease where I don't produce enough insulin. What I eat has a big impact on the quality of my life because
Yes.
of the blood sugar levels that result from the diet. So we Julie had been growing some of our own food and making some of our own food prior to that, but we I think that really caused us to reevaluate everything and to start looking at taking more control of our own food production. So it kind of that was like we were living in a rental unit at the time, and we had a small garden out back. We moved to a new place where the landlord let us tear up the entire front yard and
Nice.
make
Good landlord.
and yes, it was amazing. So we had an urban garden. We became known as the people with corn growing in our front yard, and
Love it.
kind of fed ourselves from that, as well as the neighborhood. We'd put out extra, and people coming by would pick that up. Um, but we always kind of dreamed of having a larger place, a larger capacity to grow our own food and everything, but it always felt out of reach. And then after Julie's diagnosis, if you want to talk a little about that and that process.
Yeah, so we spent several years really transforming our daily habits and getting really healthy and lost a lot of weight. We're really fit. And then in 2015, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and
Oh my
actually
goodness.
two different types of cancer in my left breast. And it was a complete shock. It was just one night changing my clothes for bed. I found a lump. And I was 35 at the time, no family history. And it really just was a fork in the road that we had not planned. And we focused for about 6 months really intensely on on the cancer journey and whether or not I was going to survive. And after my diagnosis, and I had to have my left breast removed, and I ended up having a silicone implant placed, I came to the end, what they called the end of my treatment, and I was left with chronic pain.
Mm.
And I was diagnosed nearly 30 years below the national average, and I was left with a lot of physical issues, a lot of stress, and nobody really knew how to handle any of that. They sort of just told me like, well, this is the best that you can hope for. And that was really hard for me to sort of come to terms with. And at the same time, I felt like we'd been given a second chance. And because I was also told that there's no way to know what caused my cancer and what we can do to prevent it recurring, we sort of realized that it was time to stop speculating on our dreams and start living them with whatever time I
Mm.
have left on this earth. And my dream has always been to homestead. And so we decided to go for it.
Yeah.
And that was in early 2016. We made the decision. It took us a couple of years to save up and be ready for the down payment for where we are. And in 2018, we moved to our homestead. Now, between my diagnosis and actually just 6 months ago, I've had 7 surgeries, including the original biopsy, and really struggled with chronic pain um, through that. I'm hoping that the surgery I had 6 months ago will really be the end of that. This season is going to be when we find out. Last weekend we did our full on spring planting. Summer crops went in, and I really tested it, and things are going good. But it's definitely been a long journey.
Yeah, that's a very long journey. I'm sure that the roller coaster has been unimaginable.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot stands out to me as you were talking. One of the biggest things, though, is like what an inspiration, the fact that you guys had every excuse not to chase the homestead dream. Like, I mean, anyone else would have just been like, you know what, that is back burner, not important. Like, we're just not going to do it. We can't do it. I can't. We can't. But you guys pushed through, and I think that's extremely admirable. Just that you chose to take the bull by the horns and just make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, for us with both of our health issues and really our approach to life is always that we don't always get to choose what happens to us. You know, Kevin didn't choose autoimmune issues, I didn't choose
Yeah.
cancer, but we do get to choose how we respond to them.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
so every step of the way, that is our approach, and that's the approach we took to going for our homestead dream.
Yes, that translates well over to that for sure. So, what does your day to day look like now? I mean, it's been a while since both of your diagnoses, and you've had all these surgeries and all the ups and downs. Do you still deal with the aftermath of that on a daily basis, or is that mostly under control? What does that look like?
Well, for me, diabetes is something I'll be dealing with for the rest of my life.
Yes.
I have tools to help me manage my blood sugar. I have an insulin pump attached to me, as well as a electronic continuous glucose monitor that checks my blood sugar every 5 minutes. Um, it's amazing how much of my day is taken up now just looking at numbers and trying to bump them one way or the other.
Yeah.
It was really overwhelming at first. I'm fortunate to have health insurance that allowed me to get these extra tools because it has made a big difference. But it's kind of ever present. In addition to the effects on my blood sugar, the autoimmune issues also do cause like transient pain in my joints and
Okay.
in my muscles, and there's other things that I deal with, but the blood sugar is the main constant factor. But the like our homesteading activities actually overall help with the management of the disease. There's a lot of physical activity in homesteading, and the best thing for high blood sugar is to get out and move. So often just day-to-day chores can help me, manage if I'm having a high day. If I'm having a day where I'm tending low, I have to think ahead a little bit, and um, usually it just means I get to eat a little bit more, which is not necessarily a bad thing. but it's sort of a constant balancing act, and I just need to be a little more conscious of how much energy I'm putting into my body, how much I'm putting out at any given time, because it doesn't work quite the same as somebody who has a normally functioning pancreas. um, as
Sure.
far as the pain that comes along with the condition, it sometimes means that I'm going to have to take some breaks and not get as much done as I had hoped. Uh, and I have to learn to be kind to myself in those moments, because it's easy to get frustrated and like feel like it's a weakness and sort of get negative thoughts. But um, sort of the upside is if I take a break, I get to look around and just notice the environment around me, the wildlife that we live here with. It's kind of the wild part of Wild Homestead Living is
Mm.
we really enjoy our wild neighbors as well. So sometimes just that, taking a break, taking a quiet moment, walking our path in the woods, or just sitting on the porch and seeing what's out there, um, it can actually, it seems like a negative, like a limitation, but it's actually calming, and it's more positive if I just change my attitude about it a little bit.
Yeah. I think we could all do better at that. I know I sometimes get so caught up in the projects that when I finish a project, I don't even acknowledge to myself I finished it. I'm just like going to the next one. And sometimes you just have to sit back and go, look at, we've made good progress. Like, let's enjoy it. So I love that
Yes.
you're recognizing that and using that for that.
Yeah, and for me, fortunately, I'm hoping that my issues will have an end and be able to build my strength again. But after 7 years of chronic pain and surgeries, I'm much, much weaker than I was when I started. And so I for our first several years, had just really severe pain that would limit me. And now I have less pain, but I have a lot of weakness. And so I find that I'm sure many other homesteaders listening experience this, are very ambitious, have big plans and goals. And even when I was at the peak of my health, I always, wanted to do more than was realistic. Now it's very true. So the homesteading can sometimes be frustrating, and having those limits and trying to listen to my body. And I've definitely had enough times where I was like, I'm not going to listen to the fact that I'm getting tired. I still want to get all those squash in the ground, and had that backfire. And so, we're learning to slow down a little bit, and enjoy those moments where we can pause and look around. We also bought a couple of rocking chairs for our front porch, which, I always thought of that like when we get to our golden years, we'll get rocking chairs, but
Yeah.
we're in our middle age and we got them. And sometimes when I'm frustrated that we have to slow down, we'll just sit there.
Yeah.
And sometimes those can be the sweetest moments of our day when we do, like you said, get to pause and reflect on all we have accomplished,
Yeah.
talk about how grateful we are for what we do have, and dream about the next thing.
I like that. I love that. So kind of paint a picture for the listeners and the viewers. Like, what does your homestead entail? Do you have cows? Do you have goats? Do you have a garden? Kind of paint the picture for us.
Yeah, so we are on about 1.3 acres in the Snoqualmie Valley of Washington State. It is about an hour east of Seattle in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. So it's very, very green and lush. It's lots of trees. It's also one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. The
Mm.
median housing price here, I just looked it up, is $880,000
Oh, wow.
on
Wow.
average. So this is as much as we were able to afford. And fortunately, there's a giant septic mound in the middle of our open space, which nobody wanted to buy and
Yep.
deal with. So our homestead is not ideal.
All
Um,
right.
and what's funny is, we thought that when we first came into this, we had a very limiting belief that you could only be a real homesteader if you owned rural land and were, growing most of your own food. And when we got here and we started, we realized we'd been homesteading all along, even when we, were in the city. And all of that stuff that we learned really helped us hit the ground running here. But it has been slow because of our health, both in the energy we can put out and the finances, because we've had to spend a lot on our medical bills. So right now we have one garden. It is stock tanks, it's raised beds.
Nice.
And Then we have a small patio garden. That's another kind of container garden. We have dreams of a really big chicken coop and run, more gardens, orchard, possibly goats. And we just put in an apothecary garden, but that's about it right now. Kevin, can you think of any other ways to describe our homestead?
Yeah, we have our worm farm or our worm bin that we've been supplying folks around the area with starts on their own worm bins.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are right now mainly what we're doing is growing our own food, but we have had some setbacks that have slowed down, like Julie's saying, some of the other aspirations like goats and chickens.
Very understandable. Yeah.
And we try to take things slow. We try not to, like, we don't want to get in over our heads financially on anything. We try to save up so we can purchase things outright as much as possible instead of going into debt. Just practicing personal responsibility in all things.
Yes. So yeah, I love that so much. You probably heard me rant and rave about that before. I will refrain, but that's one of my favorite topics. So
yes,
even when it makes you go slower, it's so important.
Right. And I feel like it's so important. And it's not the fun, exciting, Instagram worthy parts of homesteading, right, but to us, it's absolutely essential to this way of life and the peace and calm and security. I realized that we were talking about all the outside things, but we do cook almost 100% of our own food. I can. And even though we're not able to grow everything ourselves here, we intentionally moved to this area because we're surrounded by farms and other homesteaders, and we can buy and trade and barter for other things. So as much as I wish that I had my own chickens at this point, we've traded worms from our worm farm for eggs. And I do a lot of sewing. So sometimes we mend in exchange for, like wild fish and game. Yeah. And in this way, we're using our gifts and helping other people support their gifts for like community sufficiency.
Hey friends, I want to interrupt this episode for just a sec to answer a question that a lot of you have been asking me lately, and that is, do I still love my Harvest Guard reusable canning lids? So last year I did a video about these lids and it kind of went viral, and we ended up creating a backlog of orders for the Harvest Guard company. So it was kind of crazy, but as a result, a lot of you watched that video and were curious to know if I still like these lids all these months later. And my answer is yes, I absolutely do. I love that I can buy them once. I don't have to rebuy them constantly, which right now in this world of crazy, unforeseen shortages of materials, that's a huge bonus. Also, the sustainable part of me just really likes the fact that something isn't going into the garbage every single time I open a jar of home canned food. I will say my one caveat with these lids is that they do have a little bit of a learning curve. So I would recommend that you can your first batch with water. And if you want to see the whole process of how they work, because they're a little bit different than your typical metal lids, I'm going to drop a link to that video where I showed you how to use them down in the show notes of this video. But if you want to try them for canning season this year, you can do so over at theprairiehomestead.com/canning lids. And if you use code HOMESTEAD, you'll save 15% on your order. Now, back to our episode. I think that's a really under highlighted part of the homesteading lifestyle is that bartering. And I mean, I've even been guilty of it. We're so hung up on self-sufficiency, or even just the term self-sufficiency. And it's really not. I mean, if you look at the old time homesteaders or any community like the Amish, they're leaning on each other. And so it's a little bit of a misnomer to think I have to be a homesteader and I have to only grow and produce everything all by myself. So there's absolutely no shame. I think it's even healthier to be reaching out into your community like that and bartering and trading and pulling on those resources.
Absolutely.
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely, one of those like the silver lining or the unexpected gifts from the challenges that we face that we might not have chosen that path otherwise. And we've met some wonderful people in our community this way.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the other aspect of it is you meet so many folks that you can learn a lot from. Like it's not just the exchange of what you're producing, but the way that it's done. You can learn just so much from seeing other people, the way they're doing it.
Yes, yeah, like absolutely. Last weekend we found out that there's a small startup herb farm in our area. And so we went out and met with her, and we bought some plants, and she gave us a tour of her farm. And then we're just learning how to grow medicinal herbs. And so she's been just a great resource and been so generous and willing to help us learn there.
That is awesome. Yes, those are so valuable, those connections, the local ones especially. Yeah. So you said something when you were talking a few minutes ago, that when you were in the city, the things you were doing there gave you the ability to hit the ground running when you got the homestead. And that's something that I have talked about with folks so often when they email me and they're like, I want to move, but I can't right now. So can you give us a little more insight? What kind of skills and habits were you cultivating back during your city period of your life?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said, we've been together for 20 years, really long time. For younger homesteaders, they might not realize that when we started, the internet wasn't really much of a thing. And so, my first garden, I bought seed packets at the grocery store, and I stuck them in the ground. Very little grew. They looked nothing like the seed packets. I thought I was a
Yep.
failure. It's very frustrating. I had, no one around me to talk to. I eventually found out there was a nursery, like a garden nursery, nearby. And I went there, and they had photocopied pages
Nice.
that I could pick up. And then I could just talk to the people who worked there. So I just regularly go and talk to people. And then slowly, over a series of years, I got a little bit better and a little bit better. And then when we moved to the house that Kevin mentioned, it was in West Seattle, which is really close to Puget Sound, which is a huge inland saltwater body. We had a big yard. Our landlord was from Iceland, from Europe, and I think that helped him to have a very different view of the world and being self-sufficient, growing your own food. And he was more than willing to let me dig up the entire front yard. And um, and then and then we started growing our own food, and it's a slightly different zone. So we're garden zone 8B where we are here. There it was probably garden zone like 8A, a little bit different. But I was able to kind of put the theory and practice into play. And there's such a difference between learning about something, watching YouTube videos, and trying it yourself in your own place. And so those years of practice in gardening really helped. It was in the city, so we were on a city block, and we had lots of people who would walk right by me on the sidewalk, and were always more than willing to share their opinions and thoughts about what I was doing.
I'm very sure they were.
Yeah, I didn't always love, but it helped me get a different perspective. And then even when it was, a lot of work or it got hard, we had neighbor kids who knew they could run into our yard and eat food.
Yeah.
And there was such like a joy and a positive feeling that came from seeing that kind of community connection. So practicing the gardening was something we did a lot. I also loved cooking. I grew up cooking with my grandmother. We had an off-grid cabin. They didn't call it off-grid back then, but it was a little tiny cabin where she taught me how to cook on an old-fashioned wood stove. And I'd kind of put aside those skills when we started focusing on our careers. But when Kevin got sick, I was able to bring those back out and sort of refresh them and start to build up those skills. We also were very poor at the time. We were working in a nonprofit organization. It was a wildlife hospital. That's where we met, caring for injured and orphaned wild animals.
Oh, cool.
And so I would make wish lists of all the tools I wanted. And I would save up. I remember saving up for my Dutch oven and finally being able to buy it, and how exciting that was. And then I didn't know anybody who cooked with a Dutch oven. So then that was its own trial and error. So it was definitely this, slow building of our skills and our tools, so that when we got here, we were able to hit the ground running. Oh, maybe Kevin can talk about living with wildlife and the challenges there too that helped us when we got here.
Yeah. Well, we both come from wildlife backgrounds. We have biology degrees. We worked with wildlife for decades. I worked for 19 years with injured and orphan wildlife, and a lot of my work was involved people with conflicts with wildlife. So that's one thing that was we both are wildlife fans, and we didn't want to move to the country and set up a system where we were going to immediately come into conflict with all of our wild neighbors. So uh, when that's one of the reasons that we're going slower on some of our projects, because there's a higher cost involved with building something that's wildlife proof usually,
Yes.
versus just throwing something up. So our main garden, we have a lot of deer in our area that would really love to help themselves to our garden. And
Yes.
rather than, we looked at it kind of from their perspective, like what would they avoid, rather than putting up like a 8-foot deer fence. We chose to put up about a 6-foot 2-rail vinyl fence, and then container raised bed, basically they're water troughs made into raised beds inside of that, with narrow enough walkways that any deer would, feel pretty vulnerable if it was thinking about jumping in there. There's nothing to land on, and once they're in there, it's very like enclosed.
Mm.
The garden's been up and running 2.5 years now. Lots of greens in there, lots of deer walking right by and looking in, but not braving the jump over the fence. We also knew we have a lot of rabbits here. So the lower portion is chicken wire buried. Lowest rail is high enough that rabbits won't jump in. We did have one that showed us that we had a weakness in the fence.
In the gate.
Of course.
That Julie found in there one time. He didn't jump into the raised beds, but he
I was
was
just going
in
to say,
the,
is he getting into the stock tank? Because if he is, that's a determined rabbit.
right. um,
Fortunately not.
No,
Okay,
he
good.
got in and then he couldn't figure out how to get out, so we had to help him out. But the around the stock tanks also we have gravel, which is meant to deter slugs, because they don't like to slide across loose gravel very much. And then copper tape around the top of the tanks as a backup in case the slugs do make it in. All of these things were like we thought about ahead of time and built it into the design of the garden, rather than quickly putting in a garden when we first moved in and then addressing problems as they came. We tried to anticipate problems, plan for them, and then design the garden to meet that. And so far, successful. I was just saying, we've had a couple bears show up on our trail cams in the last week, and I was just wondering if if any of them decided that they wanted some of the greens in the garden, it might be a little bit less of a deterrent to them than the deer, that vinyl fence. But
Well, that will be
so
interesting.
Yeah.
How that goes.
I hope that's not a problem that we have to solve.
Yeah, there's enough other enticing wild food on the property for them that I'm hoping that they'll not need to look at the garden. But that is one bridge we'll have to cross if we come to it.
Sure.
So
I like the thought process, though, that you put into it. I had never thought about the copper to tape. I have slugs, too, all of a sudden. I think they came in because I didn't put gravel in my walkways because I did not know that. And so I put bark in the walkways. And somebody else was saying, oh, I got this bark from the same facility and it has slugs in it. And I'm like, that's where my slugs came from. Because they just appeared. Like, I never had slugs. And then 2 years ago, I have slugs everywhere. So, sorry, rabbit trail. But
I'm so sorry.
Light bulb moment. They're the worst.
They are the worst. They are the worst. And like all of the things that Kevin mentioned that we've been doing have really had been so effective at preventing slugs that I actually got to the point where I sort of forgot about them. And we started growing potatoes in bags on our patio last year. And I looked out one evening and I forgot to put copper tape on those. And like the entire plant was nearly consumed and just coated with slugs. And so we did not have potatoes. Well, actually for that reason. And then we accidentally poisoned our garden last year, which is probably another whole rabbit hole I could go down because we couldn't figure out what was happening until I started researching online and I saw you holding these stunted little tomato plants that looked exactly like ours. And then that's been an odyssey of its own.
Was it aminopyralids?
Yes.
Yeah. You're not alone for sure. It's a whole thing, as you know, from going down the Google rabbit hole. It's very.
Yeah.
We could do a whole nother episode on that though, for sure. But I want to stay on track here because I had a couple other questions. When we were talking about challenges with wildlife, what were some of the biggest challenges you guys have faced as far as with the illness or maybe the pain, that how is that kind of translated into your chores, and how have you overcome some of those pieces? I know you talked about just taking more breaks or taking it slower, but is there any little strategies or tricks you've figured out along the way?
I've got a few that I'd love to share. Do you want to share yours?
Yeah, yeah. For me, like some of the regular chores that are kind of larger in scope, something as simple as mowing the lawn. Like we have, well, like Julie said, about an acre and a third, and probably about, I don't know, maybe half to three quarters of that when we moved in were grass lawn.
Mm.
We're trying to let a lot of the wild plants take back over, but in the meantime, I'm, keeping it mowed to keep down invasive plants and weeds and things. And um, I don't want to buy a riding lawnmower. I prefer just to do it by hand, and we're not going to have lawn long term anyway. So uh, for that task, some days I just have to sort of break it up in sections and like if do it over a weekend instead of over a single day, just depending on what my current energy level allows or blood sugar level. And I think chores in general, we just have to have a little bit of flexibility on the timeline. Um, if it's a bigger job, we usually in the past we would have just dove in and busted it out as quickly as possible. Very few breaks and just get it done and move on. Now going in, we have to sort of plan to do it in stages more. And um, if the pain gets too much, we stop, don't push through it. We know, like Julie mentioned earlier, sometimes when we do push through it, we regret it. um, so it's a combination of planning for it to take longer, taking things in stages, and listening to our bodies, and sort of just being kind to ourselves, not beating ourselves up if we can't get it done as quickly as we used to. So,
Yeah. So I have a couple of really practical strategies as well as thinking about the mindset. So for me, um, one of the things I was struggling with initially was really severe pain in my chest, which made it
Mm.
difficult to lift things. Sorry if you see our cat Opal's
It's
tail.
okay. I have dogs
Um,
and stuff run through all the time. It's normal.
yeah. That's the reality of homesteading life,
It
right?
is. That are children, yes.
Yep. So it made it difficult for me to lift things. So what I started to do was do smaller amounts of weight and more trips.
Mm.
So, instead of, grabbing the 50-pound bag and throwing it over my shoulder like I used to, I might portion it out into smaller containers. Or with the wheelbarrow, instead of filling the wheelbarrow all the way full, I might do half a load and then take a couple trips rather than one big trip at a time. Then I had the silicone implant removed, and I had this other kind of reconstruction surgery that was really grueling called a deep flap. And they ended up taking tissue from my abdomen and kind of transplanting it.
Mm.
So I now have this really big scar that goes more than halfway around my waist. And there were some complications with that made it really difficult for me to wear my regular homesteading clothes. So where we live, it's really popular for people to wear stretch pants for
Oh,
women.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm so out of fashion that I don't even know they probably have a name. But when you go to like Target or you go to like the stores, that's all you can find unless I'm wearing jeans. And they look really cute, but they are not practical homesteading clothes. Like they just get
Yeah.
ripped right away.
Yes.
So it took me a while, but I found that Carhartt has these stretch pants that are like heavy duty and have pockets. And so those became my go-to pants, like the Carhartt stretch pants. And then there's this company called Handful that makes sports bras. The woman who started the company is a breast cancer survivor, and so
Mm.
she really understood the challenges that women with my issues face. And if you are a breast cancer survivor, you get a really good discount from them too. So
Oh,
those
cool.
also became lifesavers for me. And those are just really practical, like tactical tips. And then I have come to accept that I am just going to be in recovery as a perfectionist for the rest of my life. And instead of trying to fight it so much, I've started to think about, having really high intentions, but a low attachment to outcome. So
That's
I'm
so
probably
good.
still
Yeah.
always going to plan way more project than I can realistically take on during a day, but I try to let go of achieving that.
I forgot about one other aspect is that whole idea of working smarter, not harder. Um, when we were mixing the soil for our garden, like, it's pretty 13 stock tanks. It's a lot of soil, a lot of
That's a lot.
compost, a lot of mulch to mix. And initially we were going to do it by hand, but had a memory from earlier in life when I was in college. I did work on a working farm, and when we when we were mixing soil, we had these cement mixers that we would put it all in, and it saved so much labor that we decided it was worth it just to get our own. It's a cement mixer, but it's our soil mixer.
Yeah. That's so cool.
And
That's
yeah,
smart. So
it
smart.
worked great. You can
Yeah.
dump it right into the wheelbarrow after it's mixed, and it saved us probably days of time just mixing the soil, and a lot of
Those
wear and tear on our body.
Oh, for sure. Those little investments like that, I feel like we homesteaders love to be frugal, and I love to be frugal, but Christian and I always have that conversation, like, if we invest in this thing, how much money is it going to save us, and how much time, which is money, is that going to save? Like, it's that trade off, and sometimes those little purchases go a really long way.
Exactly.
Yes.
And if a purchase can have multiple uses, even better.
Yes, yes, for sure.
The
I feel like
what
I
you
feel like
just
that. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I feel like there's so many ideas I have. I want to hear yours
Yes.
though.
I just gonna say I feel like that about our chicken plucker, which does not have multiple uses, I will say. But even just for the one use, it was like, I don't know, $190 on Amazon or whatever on sale, and I'm like, best money spent. But anyway, go ahead and say what you were gonna say.
Yes, best money spent, and even things that are expensive for us. Every time we take on a project, we have a conversation about the best way to achieve it. My natural inclination is to DIY every single thing in my entire
Yeah.
life. And Kevin has helped me realize that that's not always the best choice. And we've had a couple big projects this year where that conversation has happened, and I'm so happy we went with Kevin's way of doing it. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, it's just weighing the trade-off of the amount of time that it would take us to do some of these big projects versus the cost of hiring it out. And for us, like this year, we had to put on a new roof and new siding on the whole
Mm,
house. Now we probably could have figured out how to do that. We probably could have bought materials and tried to do that, but it would have taken us so long just in research and in labor. We have friends who have done it themselves, and like they've taken months and months of every weekend and a lot of help from friends. Um, we we just decided that it made more sense to hire it out, get it done, as quickly as possible, and the amount of time that it saved us was worth the extra expense, and the fact that you know even though we could have figured it out, somebody who does it for a living probably ultimately could do it a little bit better than we would have ended up doing it. um, and then at the same time, there are other smaller projects like inside the house, especially the remodeling, where time is not quite as much of the essence. Like, it's if you're doing a roof, you don't want to have it exposed, like peel off the old roof and leave it exposed where you're trying to put on the
right.
new roof for months at a time. But inside, we can take a few months to remodel a room without any real detriment or any real concern that we're having the house be damaged, like by rain, etc. um,
Yeah.
And that reminds me of thinking back to, when we were waiting to get to our real homestead again, that landlord we had who let us tear up the front yard. It was an older home. It was nearly 100 years old, and he was elderly, and it needed some upkeep. It needed, sometimes to change out a faucet, or the downstairs really needed a new floor. And he let us do those things in exchange for keeping our rent low. And
Nice.
so it ended up being great for creating value in his home and great for actually learning how to do those things ourselves. So when we got to this
mhm.
house and started looking at, replacing carpet with wood or changing out closet doors and things like that, we'd already had a lot of experience and slowly started to build up the tools that we needed.
Yes, I love that. Building that repertoire of skills is so valuable. But it also does still pay to know when to let the professionals do their thing. There's been so many times when Christian and I have just hired it out and then we're like, man, they did it so fast and so well. And that would have taken
Yeah.
us 6 months to try to do that and figure it out. So it's that balance,
Yes.
always balancing. Yeah. So Kevin, a few minutes ago, you mentioned something about how the constant movement of homesteading has helped you with your pain or the health concerns, just kind of that motivation to get outside and do something. Do you guys do any exercises like working out in addition to homesteading, or is that kind of your main deal?
We both work out in the morning every day, in addition to homesteading. I might alter the length of that workout depending on what activity I have to do outside that day. Um, but I generally like, since my main challenge is my blood sugar.
Mhm.
I do a lot of cardio work because that helps, burn off the excess blood glucose. So I in the morning I usually get on a exercise bike, um, from anywhere from half an hour to sometimes 2 hours, depending on the day and what kind of challenge I'm having. Um, and do you want to talk about your morning?
Yeah. So that works really well for Kevin. And for me, just I have a slightly different personality and I like to mix it up. So I
Yeah.
do guided workouts online. I have two free resources that I really like. One of them is the YouTube channel called Yoga with Adrienne.
I've done her
And
stuff before. Yeah.
yeah, and she often works out with her dog Benji. And then another one called Energy Up, and they do like strength workouts and cardio workouts, and they're all really wholesome workouts you could do in your house with your kids. And they're great for us because we live so far from a town. It's not realistic for us to go to a gym, so we've kind of set up our own little mini gym at home and work through those workouts. And homesteading is very physical, but it often ebbs and flows depending on the season and the day, but we train for it like a sport. we're not
Oh, I love
we're
that.
not sports people. We never really have been, but we think of it like an athletic activity, and so we're always training for that goal.
I love that analogy. I've started to think of that too. Like I never worked out when I was younger when we were first homesteading, but now we built a little home gym here as well. And Christian and I have been we work out pretty regularly. This same as you, because like some days I'm out in the garden and I'm sweating and I'm, doing all the physical, but then there's a lot of times during the winter we're just not doing much. And I needed that balance. Because I'm always thinking like, well, we're not getting any younger, and I want to be front loading my flexibility and my fitness and not waiting till I'm, 60 and then I'm like, uh-oh, playing catch. Not that you can't play
Absolutely.
catch up. You can. If you're listening and you're older, you can still do those healthy choices. But I think just thinking ahead, and I love the idea of training for it like it's a sport.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's never too late to start working out.
Amen.
But we have definitely found it's a use it or lose it sort of thing for us, especially as we get older. It takes us a while to bounce back and on top of our health issues.
Yeah. And it's almost counterintuitive. Like, you'd think the pain would stop you from doing the exercise, but it's better if you keep moving. Like with our conditions anyway. Like, I don't know, your body releases endorphins, and you end up feeling better, than if you just sit with the pain, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Our bodies are really, I think, really designed to move. They're
Yeah,
workhorses. Yeah.
Yeah,
we think
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
food as medicine, being thoughtful and mindful about the food, but also movement as medicine. And that
Yes.
is actually the tagline of this physical therapy app that I use. So again, because we live so far from town and the town that we live near is tiny, like physical therapy isn't hands-on always an option, but it's called Hinge Health, and I use an app, and then I have a coach I can talk to on the phone or by text, and they're always talking about movement as medicine, and
Yeah.
that's helped me recover from my surgeries a lot.
I bet that's a really awesome way to get creative when you are so isolated, because I know the feeling. Gyms are a long ways away. Yeah. How has you mentioned food, Julie? How has food and growing your own food and having your gardens on the homestead and being mindful of that already, cooking from scratch, has that helped you in your journey with your health?
It really has. So um, when I was diagnosed, I was in really good shape and had really healthy eating habits. And so my doctors would tell me like, okay, you're gonna have this surgery, and we expect it to take 3 to 6 months for you to recover. And I would I would listen to them, and I would take that into consideration. And then falling back on our healthy habits, I think almost every single time I blew the curve on physical recovery, except for, when I had some like a botched surgery and some unexpected challenges. And I really think a lot of that had to do with our food. I do ebb and flow in my energy levels, but we also like to prioritize. And our main priority every week is to make sure that we're getting really healthy home cooked dinners, no matter what. And so I make a big priority one day a week to cook, because we don't grow all of our own food yet. And even, when you do, it takes effort to harvest. I usually do harvesting and shopping one day, and that's like the big push. And then the next day is the cooking day.
I like that. Batching is always so helpful.
Yeah. And then we've had people tell us that they think this sounds terrible, but what we usually do is I'll make a really big batch of soup and like sourdough rolls, and then we'll eat that for multiple nights in a row. The thing now that for Christmas, Kevin got me a pressure canner, which has like changed my life.
Yes.
But so we can do a big batch, and then I can pressure can it, so we're not eating the same soup every night. Or I'll try to make a little extra and put things in the freezer, so when we run out of a big batch, or we want variety, or on days when we're really focused on the garden and we want an easy meal, we'll be able to draw from that stock that we've been building up.
I like, homemade convenience food at its finest. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what advice would you guys have for someone who's listening or watching who is dealing with their own health challenges, maybe pain, maybe something else? Do you have any takeaways for them?
Mainly that no matter what you're dealing with, it doesn't have to prevent you from living your dream. And it can actually, going after your dream can actually help improve your overall health, especially if it is homesteading skills. Like the benefit of just the physical activity, the homesteading mindset, like it actually, it's a really good complement to self-care, really. Like it'll keep you from being, a lot of times if you're in pain, you'll end up being sedentary because you're sort of stuck in that pain. Practicing homesteading skills gives you something else to focus on. It pulls you out of that inertia. The movement actually can help with whatever chronic pain you're dealing with. There are ways you can modify what you do to, meet your goals, even if you can't get there in a straight line sometimes. And even that process can be healing. Just this sort of empowering feeling where you have a goal, you have an obstacle, which is your pain or your illness, but you find a different way to get there. I feel like there's just so many benefits, both physical and emotional, to practicing this way of life. So I guess, the main thing is even if you can't get to where you want to go immediately or directly, don't give up. Keep finding new approaches, new ways. You might actually find that you're much more capable than you thought you were. And as you try to develop these different skills, you might find that what you thought was an insurmountable barrier actually is something that is going to build up your resilience and build up your ability to pursue some of these things. So that's my main takeaway, I think.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. What is the saying? Or I don't know who said it. The obstacle becomes the way. Sometimes I think that's a really good example of that.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add is don't try your best not to compare. I have really found that comparison can be the thief of joy. And that goes for the scrolling on social media, comparing myself to other able-bodied homesteaders or other homesteaders who I have a personal sensitivity to not having a root cellar. I get really jealous of people with root cellars.
I know. Block the people.
But the irony is, we get people who send us really snarky comments about how pretty our garden is, who don't know our story and how long it took us to get to where we are. Like, we just see the tip of the iceberg, and yet it can be really easy to slip into that. I think my biggest struggle is comparing myself with my ability now to my ability before my illness. And I've just never had anything good come from the comparison. So when I find myself in that place, I try to just pause, acknowledge how I'm feeling, and take a deep breath, and then shift my focus to, instead of what I don't have, to what I do have and where I want to be going, like Kevin said. And over time, those little nudges have really helped. Sometimes people joke that my mind is like a working dog, and if I don't give it enough stuff to do, I start to chew the furniture.
Yes.
Like if I kept a cattle dog in my house all the time. And then the twist on that I found is, like, with this comparison thing, like how would I train a puppy? I wouldn't kick a puppy if it peed on the floor, right? So I'd just be like, oh, darn, I just found myself comparing again. Let's go try that other thing. And then over time, it's really built resilience.
Yes, amen. And yeah, the comparison is such a trap. I mean, I still struggle with it, even though people look at us and probably think our homestead is like, something to be aspired to. Like, there's still times I catch myself doing it. It doesn't matter how amazing you have it, or how cool your stuff is, or how much you've accomplished. I think that's always a temptation, and always to be a distraction. So I love that advice.
Ooh, related to that, I recently found this app. So I still have social media apps on my phone because we are, very public homesteaders. It's just kind of a necessary thing. But I found this app called One Sec. So one and then SEC.
Okay.
And you tie it to whatever other apps on your phone you want. And what happens is, like, when I just tap my Instagram app, instead of going right to Instagram, it goes through this kind of 3-second breathing, calming activity. And then it says, do you really want to open this app?
I love that.
And then it tracks you. And then you can time it. Like, after 3 minutes, it'll say, oop, do you still want to be doing this? And what I found in just using it for a couple of weeks is it's saving me 4 to 5 hours of mindless scrolling a week. And I thought I was pretty good, but it's been a really game changer.
That's amazing. I'm going to go download that one, because same as you, I've deleted a lot of apps, but I still have some, just because, that's what we do for a living, is we do social media stuff. So it's rough. I mean, it's wired to be a major distraction. That's what it's designed for. So I think to hack it in the reverse and figure out strategies to make sure it's serving us and we're not serving it is crucial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great tip. Well, guys, we're running up at the end of our time. Is there anything we missed that you wanted to mention or talk about?
That's a good question. What do you think, Kevin?
I don't think so. I can't think of any of the main points that we didn't cover.
Yeah, I think we've hit all the highlights. I feel like we could talk about all of this stuff in depth for days and days, but
maybe I might have to have you back on and we can just commiserate on aminopyrrolid poisoning.
Right.
Yes, I would love to.
I know.
We've tried some strategies. We haven't been talking about them very publicly because I wanted to really make sure they worked before I recommended them. But yeah, I think we're finding some solutions, and hopefully you have too.
I've been experimenting as well. So we'll keep working on that, and we'll have to get back on and do some more chatting. But can you let everybody know where they can follow along and find you guys online? I know you had a free resource too that people might like.
Yeah. So our website is wildhomesteadliving.com. And you can find us on all the social media channels at that handle, which is Wild Homestead Living. And we have several free resources on our website. The one that I think would be particularly helpful for people who are struggling with chronic pain and illness is our Quick Start Guide to Homesteading. It covers our sort of fundamentals framework and gives you lots of ideas that are really actionable and easy to start doing, whether you live in the city, country, or somewhere in between.
Love that. Okay, guys, go check them out. They have the website. I know they have YouTube and Instagram and all the things. So go have a look and connect with them. Thank you guys so much for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation, and I know it's going to help a lot of folks.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's exhausting to live with these challenges. And so I just really appreciate you giving voice and support to people living their homestead dream, regardless of what's happening with their bodies.
Absolutely. And I think having folks like you leading the way and providing that, you can do this encouragement is absolutely important and is what is needed. So thank you again.
Thank you.